Hello, and welcome to Kurth Memorial Library's Story Time. I'm Miss Beth, and today I'll be reading Hansel and Gretel. Near a great forest lived a poor woodcutter with his wife and his 2 children by a former marriage. The boy was called Hansel and the girl Gretel. They had little food, and when great famine fell on the land, he could no longer even buy daily bread. Now he thought this over by night in his bed, and he tossed about. He groaned and said to his wife, "What is to become of us? How are we to feed our poor children when we no longer have anything even for ourselves?" "I'll tell you what, husband," answered the woman. "Early tomorrow morning we will take the children out into the forest to where it is the thickest. There we will light a fire for them and give each of them 1 more piece of bread, and then we will go to our work and leave them alone. They will not find the way home again, and we shall be rid of them." "No, wife," said the man, "I will not do that. How can you bring your heart to leave my children alone in the forest? The wild animals would soon come and tear them to pieces." "Oh, you fool," said she, "then we will all 4 die of hunger. You may as well build our coffins." And she kept pestering him until he agreed. "But I feel very sorry for the poor children all the same," said the man. The 2 children had also not been able to sleep for hunger, and had heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel wept bitter tears and said to Hansel, "Now all is over with us." "Be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel. "Do not distress yourself. I will soon find a way to help us." As soon as their parents had fallen asleep, he got up, put on his coat, unbarred the door, and slipped out. The moon shone brightly, illuminating dozens of white pebbles. Hansel grabbed as many as he could and stuffed them into his pockets. Early in the morning came the woman and took the children out of their beds. Their piece of bread was given to them, but it was small. On the way into the forest, Hansel often stopped and stood still so that he could throw a pebble on the ground. "Hansel, why do you stop and look round?" said the father. "Go on." "I am looking back at my little pigeon which is sitting on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me," answered Hansel. "Fool," said the woman, "that is not your little pigeon. That is the morning sun that is shining on the chimney." Hansel, however, little by little, threw all the pebbles on the path. The woman led the children still deeper into the forest, where they had never in their lives been before. Then a great fire was made, and the woman said, "Just sit there, you children, and when you are tired you may sleep a little. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening when we are done we will come and fetch you away." When it was noon they ate their bread. Then they fell asleep, and evening passed, but no one came to the poor children. They did not awake until it was dark night, and Hansel comforted his little sister and said, "Just wait, Gretel, until the moon rises, and then we shall see the pebbles which I have strewn about. They will show us our way home again." When the moon had fully risen, they set out and found their way home, much to the horror of their stepmother and the joy of their father. The next night, however, Hansel again heard the stepmother pestering their father to get rid of the children in the forest. So he tried to sneak outside to collect pebbles again, but this time he couldn't unbar the door. It held fast. Early in the morning again came the stepmother and took the children out of their beds. Their piece of bread was given to them, but it was again small. Hansel crumbled his in his pocket so that he could throw crumbs on the ground instead of pebbles. A great fire was again made, and the woman said, "Just sit there, you children, and when you are tired you may sleep a little. We are going out into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening when we are done we will come and fetch you away." When it was noon, Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, as he had strewn his on the path. Then they fell asleep, and evening passed, but no one came to the poor children. They did not awake until it was dark night, And Hansel comforted his little sister and said, "Just wait, Gretel, until the moon rises, and then we shall see the breadcrumbs which I have strewn about. They will show us our way home again." When the moon came, they set out, but they found no crumbs, for the many thousands of birds which fly about in the woods and fields had picked them all up. Hansel said to Gretel, "We shall soon find the way." But they did not find it. They walked the whole night and all the next day too, from morning till evening, but they did not get out of the forest and were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but 2 or 3 berries which grew on a bush. They walked and walked until they reached a little house. And when they approached the little house, they saw that it was built of bread and covered with cakes, but that the windows were of clear sugar. "We will set to work on that," said Hansel, "and have a good meal. I will eat a bit of the roof, and you, Gretel, can eat some of the window. It will taste sweet." Hansel reached up above and broke off a little of the roof to try how it tasted, and Gretel leaned against the window and nibbled at the panes. Then a soft voice cried from the parlor, "Nibble, nibble, gnaw, who is nibbling at my little house?" The children answered, the wind, the heaven-born wind," and went on eating. Suddenly the door opened, and a woman as old as the hills, who supported herself on crutches, came creeping out. Hansel and Gretel were so terribly frightened that they let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said, "Oh, you dear children, who has brought you here? Do come in and stay with me. No harm shall happen to you." She took them both by the hand and led them into her little house. Then she set before them milk and pancakes with sugar, apples, and nuts. Afterwards, 2 pretty little beds were covered with clean white linen, and Hansel and Gretel lay down in them and thought they were in heaven. The old woman had only pretended to be so kind. She was in reality a wicked witch who lay in wait for children and had only built the little house of bread in order to entice them there. When a child fell into her power, she cooked it and ate it. When Hansel and Gretel came into her neighborhood, she laughed with malice and said mockingly, "I have them. They shall not escape me." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she was already up, and when she saw both of them sleeping and looking so pretty, with their plump and rosy cheeks, she muttered to herself, "That will be a dainty mouthful." Then she seized Hansel with her shriveled hand, carried him into a little cage, and locked him in behind a grated door. Scream as he might, it would not help him. Then she went to Gretel, shook her until she awoke, and cried, "Get up, lazy thing, fetch some water and cook something good for your brother. He is in the cage outside and is to be made fat. When he is fat, I will eat him." Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was all in vain, for she was forced to do what the wicked witch commanded. And now the best food was cooked for poor Hansel, but Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Every morning the woman crept to the little cage and cried, "Hansel, stretch out your finger that I may feel if you will soon be fat." Hansel, however, stretched out a little bone to her, and the old woman, who had dim eyes, could not see it and thought it was Hansel's finger, and was astonished there was no way of fattening him. When 4 weeks had gone by and Hansel still remained thin, she was seized with impatience and would not wait any longer. "Now then, Gretel," she cried to the girl, "stir yourself and bring some water. Let Hansel be fat or lean. Tomorrow I will cook him." Oh, how the poor little sister did cry when she had to fetch the water, and how her tears did flow down her cheeks. "Dear God, help us," she cried. "If the wild beasts in the forest had only eaten us, we would at any rate have died together." "Just keep your noise to yourself," said the old woman. "It won't help you at all." Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out and hang up the cauldron with the water and light the fire. "We will bake first," said the old woman. "I have already heated the oven and kneaded the dough." She pushed poor Gretel out to the oven from which the flames of fire were already darting. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it is properly heated so that we can put the bread in." And once Gretel was inside, she intended to shut the oven and let her bake in it, and then the witch would eat her too. But Gretel saw what she had in mind and said, "I do not know how I am to do it. How do I get in?" "Silly goose," said the old woman. "The door is big enough. Just look, I can get in myself." And she crept up and thrust her head into the oven. Then Gretel gave her a push that drove her far into it and shut the iron door and fastened the bolt. Oh, then the witch began to howl quite horribly, but Gretel ran away. She ran to Hansel, opened his little cage, and cried, "Hansel, we are saved! The old witch is dead!" Then Hansel sprang like a bird from its cage when the door is opened. How they did rejoice and hug each other and dance about. And as they had no longer any need to fear her, they went into the witch's house, and in every corner there stood chests full of pearls and jewels. "These are far better than pebbles," said Hansel, and filled his pockets. And Gretel said, "I too will take something home with me," and filled her apron full. "But now we must be off," said Hansel, "that we may get out of the witch's forest." When they had walked for a long time, the forest seemed to be more and more familiar to them, and at length they saw from afar their father's house. Then they began to run, rushed into the parlor, and threw themselves round their father's neck. The man had not known one happy hour since he had left the children in the forest. The stepmother had since died of the famine, so it was now only the three of them. Gretel emptied her apron until pearls and precious stones ran about the room, and Hansel threw one handful after another out of his pocket to add to them. Then they had no more worries, and the three lived together in perfect happiness. Thank you for joining us for today's story, Hansel and Gretel. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time.